I was 30 when I made my first salary. I didn't understand corporate hierarchies or that you need to keep your mouth shut, which worked amazing because Nokia encouraged you to stand up and stood up for myself. I was lucky enough that people around me didn't throw me to the dogs. I just wrote to a bunch of people and saying, you know what, I have 6 months of severance. I'm sitting here. If you want some, if you want a free resource, I'm available. Some of the most high impact people that I can imagine today in the Indian ecosystem are actually running sales.
Very rarely graduates out of B school and says, I want to be a salesperson.
Yeah, that I think is, I think they'll change, right? Again, I can only talk from my experience, right? The salespeople at Clevertap were the highest paid people in the company by a massive margin. Demand for software grows when people get more expensive and the value of time, right, goes up. Do Indian businesses struggle with having massive databases of customers? Absolutely. Bajaj Finserv, from what I understand, pays well north of $10 million a year to Salesforce. People say this software is more friendly to use. I said, that's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Friendly software is great, but nobody buys enterprise software because it's friendly. You buy enterprise software because it achieves the company organization goals, right? The customer acquisition cost is a big problem. The most expensive thing that a B2B company ever buys is discovering the intent of the customer.
Yeah.
Always.
This is the longest episode of the Create Wealth podcast, and for a reason. Today I have with me Kuldeep Dhankar, the co-founder of Last9, who brings together a wealth of experience from Microsoft, Nokia, Clevertap, straddling multiple domains across these companies. This podcast is a masterclass on sales, building SaaS for India, and wealth creation. There's even a Shahrukh Khan connection. I hope you'll enjoy this one. I'm Sandeep Jethwani, co-founder of Deserve. Kuldeep, I think one common theme in India is building from India for the world, right?
Yes.
And especially in SaaS. And I've heard you talk about India as being a potential market for SaaS, right? I've not seen many companies build in that thought process. Why do you believe that India is an interesting market?
I mean, it's not a matter of belief, I think. I think it's a matter of numbers. But first of all, let me just talk about, a lot of these beliefs that people have. I've always found that, and this is not my idea, this is very common, right? That there are two ways in which people come up with beliefs in their own personal thing. One is, mimesis or general memes, right? Ki everybody is making for the world from India, right? There must be something to it.
Yeah.
Right? The other one is
crowd wisdom, basically.
Yeah, crowd wisdom, right? Mimesis, right?
Yeah.
Memes.
Yeah.
SaaS Indian SaaS will be great.
Yeah.
So I saw this video. I think it was some chaps from Excel or somebody, right? Who was talking about, there are 3 core profit pools in, traditionally in India, right? One was get a license, right? From the government to do something, right? The license Raj and so on and so forth, right? Manufacture which is manufacturing at massive scale, which almost always requires some degree of
regulatory approval and so on.
The other one was lending, right? Lend money, which is a big profit pool, and if you look at the banking industry,
or even most of the fintechs are lenders. Yeah,
correct, right? And the participation that banks have in our primary big indexes, right? And the third one is export, right? Bring in dollars, and that has been true, right, for the past 30-40 years, and so on and so forth. And the problem with all these 3 domains is, big entry barriers, right? Big entry barriers. And early SaaS was that Indian software consumption just hadn't caught up.
Yeah.
But I think to me, when I say is that when do people need software? And I'm talking specifically about software, but I think that's true now for increasingly more and more things.
Services in general.
Services, manufacturing, right? Roti, kapda, and makan, for example, right? All 3 are massive industry, right? Who would have thought that Zomato does what it does, right? And it's very impressive, and Swiggy IPOing soon, right? Built in India for India. India is a large market, right? This is something that, even my background, when I worked with some of these companies, it was so amazing on how a company in the US sees India and how a company in India sees India, right?
Explain more. What is the difference?
Salesforce. Right, makes almost $800,000. $800 million in India, right? Almost close to $1 billion of recurring revenue in India.
Yeah, I always wondered why Arundhati Bhattacharya is the chairman of Salesforce. The past chair of SBI is the chairman of Salesforce in India.
They make close to $1 billion out of India, right? When you go talk to an Indian SaaS company, they all want to go sell in the US.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if Salesforce is a company, right? It's based out of, it's the tallest tower in San Francisco and everything, right? I'm thinking there must be a reason. Right? Microsoft is one of the largest software companies in the world, right? Has massive Indian operations and has been very, very profitable. Amazon, if you look at their operations in India, right? I mean, they're not just building software for the world, right? They have big development centers, but they're selling software here. They're selling infrastructure here. Where small companies tend to be, let's go sell. And sure, that is a big market. If you build a company, you go to Pune, you meet a company like Dhruva, right? And they're doing really well. And we do that really well. But there have to be other approaches, right? So net, when you look at first principles, you realize that if you, for example, want to sell software in India, right? And specifically for software, demand for software grows when people get more expensive. And the value of time, right, goes up because software is effectively, it either amplifies the number of people, the potential of a people. You take Tally, you need 2 less accountants. Or an accountant can do more, right? Imagine doing, in general ledger versus Tally, right? And I'm using Tally as a reason, right? Similarly, if you take, the amount of time, what do you pay people for a month, right? You get, at best, you can probably buy 120, 140 hours. In India, it's probably closer to 80 hours a month, right? Because chai breaks, you also pay for.
We'll ask Mr. Murthy.
Right? Sure. The 70 hours is, of those 70 hours, I think 20 are just commute. So, I wouldn't really blame him because, people just take 20 hours a week just to get to office. But if you add all of that up, right, it has gotten more expensive. Today, 20-30 lakh rupees a year person is not the highest paid person or a very highly paid person, right? That's almost like 4 or 5 years down. You expect that for software engineers, which means that people are going to want to increase efficiency. All economies increase efficiency. So for me, it's like, people would want to buy software. And I've held this belief for about 15, 20 years now, ever since I've been really, really in the market. And to my surprise, I've found that some of the largest buyers of software are actually here. I've been sitting in BKC, right? And if you look around, right, every single one of those companies are spending well over, 50, 60, $100 million of all major SaaS categories. Almost all categories have a TAM, addressable market of at least 100 million or so easily.
And the buyers are recognizing the need for this.
I mean, the buyers need to get their job done, right? Buyers don't want to buy software. They want to get something done, right? They can either get it done by hiring an army of people, or they can get it done by hiring software. Software just does a job, right? And Salesforce, for example, right? Salesforce primary business is to be the system of record for customers, right? And do Indian businesses struggle with having massive databases of customers? Absolutely, right? I mean, I don't know the exact number, but one of the largest customers for Salesforce in India, right, is Bajaj Finserv,
I'm sure.
Which makes sense. But if you look and if you Google a little bit, right, and if you go search a little bit, you'll be surprised how big that contract really is.
So it would be $100, $200 a month per person?
I mean, Bajaj Finserv, from what I understand, pays well north of $10 million a year to Salesforce. Again, I don't know, right? Because this is obviously... But, when you look around and you're able to triangulate, right? I'm saying, wow. And it makes sense, right? I mean, we sell about $5-6 billion worth of infrastructure services between AWS and Azure and so on and so forth, right? My numbers could be a little bit off, right? Again, but India is a massive market for software. India is a massive market for pretty much anything. Who was the gentleman at Manoj Modi? He said India is a supply constrained market.
Yes.
I genuinely believe that, because in India, once you have the supply and once you learn how to do business in India, and by the way, I don't mean anything grey by that. India has a way of doing business, right? You got to understand that the person...
As in any sales, you have to customize your sales to the client.
You have to be empathetic, right? You have to understand, my job is to sell in a way the customer can buy. Right? So when you adapt to that, India is a brilliant market.
I'll come to that, Kuldeep, but on this point that let's say there is a company which has created a software which they want to sell. They have two choices. Where is the highest bang for their buck, right?
Yes.
And arguably, the bang for the buck is selling in the US. And therefore, as a software company, where do you decide to start? And there are some interesting companies which have sold in India first before they've sold elsewhere, right? So how does a SaaS founder think about this?
So, There's this brilliant book by Professor Richard Rummelt called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Saying, a strategy has essentially, you need to do a diagnosis.
Yeah.
A good strategy has 3 parts. You do a good diagnosis, right? Then you make a clear policy, and then you set up a cogent actions to follow that policy. Now, if you are somebody who has a deep network or has let's say a beachhead in the US, right? I'll give you a great example, right? Dhruvil Sangvi, right? Loginext, right?
Yeah.
He studied at CMU, right? Has deep networks, very suave, right? Actually lives in New York as well as Bombay, right? When he goes to the US, right, he has something to leverage, right? He understands the market, he understands the common cultural nuances of the market, right? Goes there, he saw the opportunity in the US and realized that, if he builds out of India, right? Dhruvil's from Ahmedabad, right? He builds it out. For Dhruvil, it makes absolute sense to be US first, right? Think of me, right? To me, US is a place where you go, it's an exciting land of wonders or whatever, right? It's a big country, right? But I don't have any natural networks there, right? So I'm going to go there, I'm going to make the first hire. And the first hire in any new country is always a very, very scary, is a big moment. So one is, that aspect, right? That do I even understand that market, right? Imagine an American company coming to India and trying to hire their first person, right? I get cold feet when I'm trying to hire a first big hire in India, right? Imagine a company that actually doesn't even understand what works and what doesn't, right? There is that. In addition to that, it is just simply more expensive to go to market in the US. So depending on the amount of capital you have, the ambition you have, right? You can pick. Now, it doesn't have to be an either or. For a lot of SaaS companies, what I tell them is that, okay, do you know how to sell? If you have a mature go-to-market leader who has seen and executed, go-to-market strategies in multiple markets, fine, start with the US because, you will not go crazy, right? But if you don't even know how to sell, you don't even know, you don't even have never experienced product market fit with your first software. India is a friendly market, right? They will let you down softly, right? You'll be able to validate faster and cheaper, right? The hardest challenge in software as a service, actually, because the revenue is recurring. Even if you spend $1 to buy $1, right? You still end up on the right side of things.
Correct.
But if you look at all the public SaaS companies in the US, right? It's amazing how much dollars they have to spend just to get a new dollar. So the economics are not...
They are more about the LTV of that dollar. That how much time that... And they're assuming that it will be more recurring than...
But if you look at SaaS and listed SaaS in the US, right? The number of profitable SaaS companies is actually almost non-existent, right? I mean, the ratios just don't... to be a SaaS investor is to be really out in the Wild West and so on and so forth. So my point is that, look, I don't think India is a bad market. I think it's cheaper to go to market there, right? You can get a great metric, by the way. For example, you can get 20x on the base pay of a good salesperson in India per year. Right? You'll be hard pressed to get 4 to 5x of a US salesperson because if you're hiring on the West Coast, you're hiring a sales, an AE would probably set you back by $150,000, $180,000, right? Somewhere there. Plus, double of that will be commission. And how much will you actually make, right? Very rarely will a person carry more than $1 million of a year.
So, Kuldeep, it seems like there are two things here. One is that you've created a good product, but where you sell is also a function of yourself.
Yes.
Like what you're good at. Like the Dhruvil example that you gave, that he understood the US market and therefore for him, whereas you inherently get the India market. So you said prioritize India, right? And the second is the economics or the return on capital on the sales guy that you've hired, right?
Right, because that's the most expensive thing that a B2B company ever buys is discovering the intent of the customer. Always. Especially when you're selling to an enterprise, right? Enterprises don't advertise what they intend to buy, right? They have mid-level managers who go seek a certain capability. Right? Effectively, what companies buy, they don't buy software, they buy capabilities. I need the ability to, reconcile across millions of transactions. Say you're a company that runs a marketplace. You have 1 million transactions every day. You need to be able to reconcile that, what is the fees, marketplace fees, what I owe to the supplier and, two-sided marketplace and stuff like that. So you need to buy some very good reconciliation or financial software, right? And there are a bunch of people who sell that. So companies are not looking for a particular software. They're usually looking for a capability to buy. Right? Now, how you discover this intent, when this intent is expressed inside a company, it is expressed some sort of a plan. It is expressed, a CXO makes a plan, gives it, hands it over to a mid-level manager who says, what we need maybe a small team, maybe some software, right? Discovering this, what happens inside a company, right, is surprisingly expensive.
and one-on-one, in a sense that this is probably not what they've stated in their last year's annual report.
Nobody tells you what they want to buy. Right?
Exactly. So
you just say that. For example, one of the common things salespeople ask you, sir, do you have an initiative for this or initiative for that, right? Because your mid-level managers or your VPs or directors, right, they will probably be expressing this as, we would like to move to the cloud from our, whatever data center, on-prem, whatever, right? Now at that moment, you're not really advertising it.
Yeah.
It's the job of the company that's selling you this to discover, right? And how do you do that, right? They want to create touch points with you, and those touch points, that might involve inviting you to a round table. Now, over every 10 invites you get to probably go to one, right? Because you're busy. So, but those round tables still have to be done. Round tables are rather expensive, and you're not going to go to some round table which is at some place, right? You want to go to a place where you feel like you'll get something out of it.
Sure.
And you're not going to get something out. You're not looking to meet sellers.
Yeah.
You're looking to meet peers, and in there see if there is something interesting out in the market, right? That process.
Yeah.
So I have to do a constant round of, I have to be present in the market, I have to be seen, I have to generate awareness and all that. Right? A good marketing person will probably be more nuanced with this, but I'm a sales guy, right? All of this added up is very expensive. So again, what you're buying, the most expensive thing you're buying is intent. Right? And in the US, figuring out intent of customers is even more expensive. In India, because of the concentration of wealth and there is a degree of class, right?
Yeah.
Look, there is...
I would have thought otherwise, actually. I would have thought Americans would be more like direct in what they are thinking.
Sure, once you meet them.
Yeah.
But you got to meet them, right?
Got it.
Which you clear
Got
ICP.
Yeah.
Like, for example, somebody publicly says that, we are going to transition to, we're going to focus more on our CDP efforts and so on and so forth, right? Or I'll give you a great example, right? The recent news about some banks not being very reliable.
Yeah.
Right?
On the technology side.
All technology side. RBI coming down and saying that, hey, you guys got to fix this, right? We can't have customers being affected because you can't get your systems right or compliance right, stuff like that. How I have that. Now, I have a challenge that I know broadly this is the trouble they have. But that's now they probably have the top management probably set a goal saying, we got to fix our reliability. That those goals will become plans.
Yeah.
And those plans will require capabilities.
Yeah.
All I can sell as software is those capabilities.
Yeah.
But now, how do I discover in a company that has probably 100,000 employees, who's the person running that specific plan?
Sure.
Which means I got to go do some account-based marketing, and I got to show their ads on their LinkedIn, and then I got to make sure there's some email that is going in, and I got to be present where anybody from that particular bank or banks is speaking.
And this is still to discover it, not to sell it.
Discover it. I'm not selling yet, right? I need to know who can I talk to, my correct customer profile, right? So by the time you do this, it ends up being very expensive, right? So customer acquisition cost is a big problem. And if you look at CAC figures of American SaaS companies, right? Very quickly you realize, oh my God, I can't operate in the market because most people are undercapitalized for this.
Sure.
So, there was a golden time for SaaS where growth mattered, right? But today I think, profit, of course, companies have to be profitable. It's a mature market, right? And if you look at SaaS as a whole, right, there's a lot of other distortions. For example, in SaaS, the cost of goods sold doesn't include engineering expenses.
Yeah, which is below the line.
COGS is very weird.
Correct.
Like, dude, the more expensive thing you buy is engineering time, and you're not including that as your cost. It feels a little weird. So there are some amazing businesses. Don't get me wrong, this is an amazing business. A business where one customer pays you a couple of crore rupees, right, in a recurring manner, where there is a reasonable chance that they will pay you that same amount.
Sure.
Very few businesses have that comfort.
Yeah.
So software is still attractive. I believe that SaaS built in India for India has very bright future. I mean, these are going to be solid businesses, and this is also the market where you want to list them. Because these markets value.
Absolutely.
If you look at some of those recent IPOs, right, and sure, they've been ups and downs, right, but some of these IPOs give me hope, right? The Indian market knows how to value technology businesses, and
and more richly than they would be valued elsewhere. Like today,
definitely so.
Absolutely. Like if you, other than the big seven, most of the other companies, and you compare Indian technology companies, they are priced more.
Absolutely, right, and I think that makes a lot of difference. Now, of course, the way Indian startups are set up, right? Most are Delaware C Corps, and and so on and so forth. So there is still something left, but 10 years from now, if you want to be, in my opinion, if you want to be a strong SaaS business with holding power, you want to be based in India. You want to be selling to India because it is very easy for you to hold a big competitor out of India due to the power of I mean, again. If you are an Indian company that has a great alternative to, say, an American SaaS product, you have you have a very unique advantage, right? And this is a strategy that I've played with a little bit, right? Wherein I can hold my own against an American competitor because I'm more agile and more I know the landscape.
And you understand the buyer. But on this particular point, we spoke about discovery, but then now the actual sales, there is one who's the user of the software. There's one who is the person who will drive the decision. And finally, one person who will probably sign the check, right? And as a salesperson in SaaS, how do you figure out where do you need the interventions on sales? Like, kab kisko kya bechna hai? Like, how do you deal with that?
The way you look at this, at least the way I look at this, is very simple, right? What is the purpose of sales and what is the job of sales, right? And that kind of defines, right? Because again, everything goes down to the root philosophy of this thing, right? The purpose of sales is very simple: it's to create new value for the buyer, right? Whenever you're selling something, as this is, there's a whole approach of value selling, which is that you need to create new value for the customer or the buyer, right? And those are actually nuanced terms, but say buyer, right? That if I buy this is the new value I'll create. Sure. Which means that you'll be able to get away by hiring fewer people, or your people.
So let's say you'll save 10 crores a year.
10 crores, right? Yeah. Everything comes down to a dollar value, right? Everything has to with software. All benefit has to boil down to, because businesses need to balance two ends, right? They need to generate a profit at the end of the day. So when you new value is usually created by helping a company achieve its goals, right? So when you talk about, say, software, or when you talk about industrial machinery, and I actually think of software as industrial machinery because it's process equipment. Software is process equipment, right? In most industries where people are doing the job, right? Software amplifies their capabilities. So it's process machinery. Whenever you're selling process machinery or industrial machinery, right, you need to align the goal with the goal of the company. Like, hey, this company has these goals. Do we make some software that enables this, right? And so where you sell, so the first rule of enterprise software sales is you never sell to the lowest person in the rung. That person has only one goal. They want to go home at 5. Right? And they're saying, you know what, we use a lot of terrible software, which is why, when people say this software is more friendly to use, I said, that's not going to matter. Friendly software is great, but nobody buys enterprise software because it's friendly. You buy enterprise software because it achieves the company organization goals. Right?
And there's no such thing as trickle up. Like, you'll sell to that guy, then
there are some examples, but those are distorted examples, because in the end, a company that sells top down in enterprise almost always beats, Slack versus Teams comes to mind. Right? Slack had a great upstart, but then Team finally entered and they said, you know what?
Correct.
Great. We already have relationships with all your customers, right? So we will just scorch the earth.
We can debate which product is better, but
it's not about better, right? I'll give it to you, right? Slack is amazing, right?
But
Teams
makes more money, I guess.
They have existing relationships. So I think with that specific bit, right? You start top down. You look at the goal. You look at the plans the organization has, right? And then you almost always sell software to a director or a VP in a company, because those are the people, right? Now, again, exceptions. There's some software that's only useful the bottom end, but I'm talking specific enterprise contracts. So what you do is you align, saying that, hey, this is what you're trying to do. This is what we enable, and we will create this new value, right? You have a marketing budget of 10 crores, and in that 10 crores, you're gonna earmark 9 crores to acquire new users. At Clevertap, what I used to say is that, what I can do is I can increase the number of people who come back, who you retain. Which means that if you have a goal to grow certain year, you're going to have some people dropping off from your funnel, right? And you're going to acquire new people to make up for that. If I can reduce this drop-off rate by a percentage point, right? That has a massive impact, because those users become more loyal, right? Which means I'll help you do retention. That goal is usually carried by the CMO or the VP of marketing or the VP of retention, right? Depending on the company. If I can tell that person that for 1 crore rupees a year, right, I can generate almost 5-6 crore rupees of acquisition value for you by retaining these people, right? That's a great ROI, and the people will buy it. So because I'm able to align the goal of the software with what they do, right? Similarly at last night, right, I'm saying, all right, what I do is I sell reliability software system. I'm saying that, okay, if I'm able to reduce your time to discover that your system has a problem, 1% of users are not able to log on, right? Systems never fail anymore, they degrade, right? I said, now those 1% people are falling off, and there is some amount of irritation, some amount of revenue being, they're not able to do transactions. If I can help you, if I can reduce your mean time to discover that problem from 30 minutes to 5 minutes, right? Those 25 minutes are saved. And in those 25 minutes, what is the new overall amount that you accrued, right? And people are always going to weigh that on how many crores or rupees have I saved. And if it aligns, they will buy, because people always have initiative to improve, to get better at things, and so on.
But let's staying with the Clevertap example. Let's say for the 1 crore that a client spends on Clevertap, let's say there's 6 crores of better outcomes, right?
Yes.
For the sales guy to get to this insight that 1 is equal to 6 for this particular company is the hard one, because the company is not laying out its metrics like that, right? To everyone to read, right? So how does a sales guy discover that?
Like this, we sit down in front of a customer and you talk to them.
Yeah.
That, hey, what are you doing? Like, for example, at Clevertap, one of the first things we do is we'll do a very detailed discovery call. We used to do this. We'll sit down, we'll talk to them saying, hey, how are you thinking about this? Right? Like, if retention is the problem I'm solving, right? Retention is proximate to how you're acquiring users, how you're thinking about users, how your marketing budget is being spent. And almost always, right, they have some CAC budget. And in a one-on-one setting, they'll be happy to tell you, because what I'm saying is, look, I'm trying to understand how your business works. And which, by the way, leads to the thing that sales is being interested. That I'm really interested in how you run the business. Because when you're asking smart question, right, the customer is actually complimented, saying, they seem to understand. They're not just about the features. They seem to understand what my business is. And saying, hey, how can I make the math work better? Right? And sales usually boils down to that. Can I make the math work better for you?
But it also seems like you need to make that trip and get to meet the customer. And
you can't
online ek mil lete hain, that doesn't work.
That was a zero interest rate phenomena, making big sales on Zoom, right? If you don't meet people, we don't communicate that well through words. It's terrible, right? But you can always see sincerity. It's if you want to ask difficult questions, I would always say do it in person. If you got to fire somebody, do it in person. You can do it with more empathy, right? As an example, right? If you want to go and give somebody an award, if you want to congratulate somebody, don't do it on Zoom, right? Sure, when we couldn't, we had to make do.
Sure.
I have this theory, right? That better investment than Zoom is plane tickets. Sure. Air travel is not that expensive. Sure, it takes a toll. So, make sure that we have a good travel policy and people are comfortable when you're traveling. But in every case, right, invest in that ability to create space, because you'll be able to get better information. People will be able to give you more time. They'll be able to they will remember you better.
And therefore, the skill set of the sales guy is not only to get the customer over the line, but also to get the customer to get talking, I suspect, right? And
that's just being interested. Honestly, there's this whole model where the salesperson is almost like making things happen, but it's not.
That rainmaker.
More often than not, it's just inputs, right? It's not it's like
I'll waltz in and I'll close the transaction.
Salespeople are not playing 4D chess, right? They're just sitting there saying, I'm genuinely interested in what you do, right? Like, one of the most best natural salesperson, and I think we know this, right? Shiladitya used to be VP of sales at Clevertap. One of the most natural sales guy, right? But if you ask him, you're a salesperson, he'll say, no, I'm not a salesperson. I remember my first meeting with him was, I'm not a salesperson. But what Shiladitya does is, when you start talking to him, he has this genuine interest in what you do, right? And, he doesn't look like, he's trying to pick your pocket, or, he's trying to take you somewhere. He will never bring up the product. He'll just simply saying, okay, how are you thinking about running the business, and so on. And after a while, he's able to make a proposition, because in the end, sales is about making a proposition that, hey, I see you're spending so much in acquisition. I have a better way for you to deliver your metrics by investing in this.
Sure.
And then it's your job to validate that assertion and so on and so forth. But the first step is always to be interested. You'll be surprised. How do we get anything done? Well, first have a conversation. And once you have a conversation and once you're genuinely interested, you'll be surprised what people tell you.
Now that you've hired so many sales guys, how do you assess in an interaction with a prospective candidate ki bhai, this guy is an interested person or not? Can he be interesting?
To be fair, I've not hired a lot of salespeople, because most of those don't make the funnel, because the first big thing about a salesperson is they're genuinely interested in you. Salesperson rarely brag about what they're selling. Good salespeople rarely brag about what they're selling and how they're selling. They're more interested in how are you, what are you doing, how you run your business. And they are curious. They're genuinely curious, right? And you can tell instantly, because they have if you're talking about their area of interest, right? They actually know, because they've learned from a lot of people and they've spoken to interesting people in the domain, right? So it flows very well. For me, good salespeople are good conversationalists, but I want to be careful that it's not some special art. They're just genuinely interested. I'm not saying that they are very polished or they use big words and everything. They're just simply saying, oh wow, this is an interesting business. And by the way, I went and looked up your business and I looked up some numbers and this is very interesting, right? They're interested in the truth, because they at some point in time have to make a proposition that results in actual actual impact.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, sure, you can get away by not creating impact for a while, but not long enough.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Most salespeople drop out because eventually, they just bullshit artists.
Right? Yeah.
Never grow.
And this sounds so similar to what we would do in wealth management, because you got to understand the client, and only then can you create an offering that actually makes sense for the client, right?
Yeah.
And so great sales guys, when we are interacting with them, will do some work on deserve and read up a little bit and come with a few interesting questions. And then sometimes even I'll sit back and say, nobody's asked me this before, and maybe he has a point. So I think that seems like an interesting.
Curious. There's no script.
Yeah.
There's no script. It's like, I have to do this, I have to do that. So, what, relax, fine. You're just a person. You can have a no agenda conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
Right. And it can lead somewhere, right? Yeah. It's almost like, can I just meet the person instead of, a mark?
Yeah.
Right. I joke telling people that, a lot of people have confidence, but the first 3 letters of confidence is con, right? So, there's very little difference between a great how people think of a great salesperson and a con man.
Yeah.
Right. Very subtle difference. But I think thing is, the con man is leading you somewhere. A salesperson just hoping that you're having a conversation, it goes someplace interesting because you might share some common interests. Yeah. More than anything, that's most important.
I think the interesting thing here, Kuldeep, is that in the US there's a sales equal to the rainmaker kind of situation. So therefore, a lot of people do aspire to be sales guys and they get paid really well. In India, on the other hand, sales was snake oil salesperson, right? And therefore, nobody very rarely graduates out of B school and says, I want to be a salesperson.
Yeah, that I think is I think they'll change. Right. Again, I can only talk from my experience. Right. The salespeople at Clevertap are the highest paid people in the company by a massive margin. Yeah. Right. And most of it I attribute to between Sunil and Anand, the 2 co-founders. Right. Yeah. Sunil had this famous line that my salespeople are driving Ferrari, I'm already on my way to an IPO. Right? Because you pay people commission, you pay them very, very well, you reward them very, very well. Yeah. It can be a brilliant and look, in the end, you're gonna need the same skills everywhere else. Right. I've hired a brilliant sales guy once who said, I'll do the sales. I just don't want you to write sales on my card. I don't want to have a sales title because it seems low status. Sure. Which, by the way, is another filter, right? If people are not willing to accept low status in situations, they're not going to go very far, right? Because eventually, you have to be the job. Yeah. I think another reason also is that the way, the whole structure of MBA, right? You can't major in sales, right? Yeah. Because we've traditionally not had very good systems of sales, right? Yeah. We rarely have had CROs talk about their system, right? Yeah. There's not much public domain information about, by the way, that's true for marketing also, right? Even marketers rarely talk about first principles. In India, most business knowledge is passed through what I was earlier talking about, mimesis, right? Yeah. People just, they do it, we will do it the same way.
But still, marketing mein Philip Kotler is there and so on. There's no sales book. Shetholm is being not.
Yeah, because sales has an adaptive discipline, right? You have to adapt at different times, right? Sure. But if you look at if you look at how Snowflake sells and if you look at how Salesforce's sales engine works, right? Yeah. Over time, you can derive good lessons and you can build your own playbooks and so on and so forth. I think the sales discipline, especially for high value sales, right, is still being written, and we are starting to see the emergence of fantastic VP sales and CROs, who specialize and operate out of India. It's early. First of all, we didn't really have in wealth management, sure, there are some people that by name who've done a phenomenal job, right? People who've been selling these big bonds and stuff like this. I have a very good friend, right, who is at IDFC, used to be at IDFC running sales and thing, right? And I've learned so much from these other domains. I think it's just one of those disciplines where, do I really see myself as a salesperson? It's, again, a mimesis, right? You don't think of a salesperson as somebody, who can create and add new value. Yeah. But I think that will change. And that's already changing, right? I mean, some of the most high impact people that I can imagine today in the Indian ecosystem are actually running sales. Yeah. And almost always, because, there are a lot of product managers, there are a lot of engineers, right? There's very few salespeople. The most in-demand career choice, every company is struggling with, where do I find a sales leader? Yeah. Right?
And you were telling me earlier about how you got Shahrukh Khan to do sales for Nokia, right?
So not me, but I was at Nokia back then, and this was Shiv Kumar, who used to be right, and again, he was way above me, and I was just a small evangelist slash product manager there. But I still remember that one moment where this was one big distributor meet, and Shiv Kumar, and there were a bunch of these distributors and these small towns, and Nokia was effectively a B2B consumer durables company, right? More than a tech company. Windows Phone was a challenging sell, and I still remember we got a lot of people into a big room, and where there were a lot of these distributors. And as a surprise, right? Apparently, Shiv Kumar, the story way he told the story was that Shahrukh Khan was a brand ambassador for Nokia. He was flying through. Passing through Delhi, and at Shiv Kumar's request, right, he said, Shiv said he graciously agreed that I will come and spend 20 minutes with the group. And, this man walks in, very, very soft body language, and, softly starts talking to people. And, he's Shahrukh Khan, right? He absolutely has a right to put himself at the center of the story. But suddenly he turned this around. He talked about how difficult it must be to believe. But then he talks about Nokia and connecting people and how they are a part of a great brand story. And he just builds this narrative that in 20 minutes, right, like there must be 1,000 middle-aged, mostly men in that room, right? And they were like standing on their, they were standing up and clapping, and just adds energy. While the man himself was very softly talking, and, and I learned a bit of a lesson there, right? At that moment, that wow, if you can just put other people make them the center of their own personal legends, right? People suddenly realize that I'm part of something bigger than myself. This is great, right? Why am I doubting this one moment, right? Should I be putting in an order for a big shipment and so on and so forth, right? It was transformative. Those 20-25 minutes, it's become a bookmark in my head of how a person with efficient, with very, very clean, very honest narrative, right, can just change the energy in a room, right? And as a salesperson, I aspire to be able to do that.
So the ability to build narrative or storytell, along with the ability to be low status, low ego.
Except low ego, except low status, right? That I understand you. This is about you. This is not about me, right? There is a place where, you need to go and, push people against the wall and, just get something done. But that's rarely ever works in sales, right? Maybe in the end, maybe in a tough negotiation scenario where finance is being problematic or stuff like that. But very rarely does that work when you're trying to sell something, right? It doesn't work.
And it seems like, therefore, sales is one of the most cerebral jobs out there, like the most requiring, because you're thinking on the feet all the time, right?
Yes.
You're listening, thinking, positioning, and then taking it forward.
I think most successful salespeople are very principled about how they want their conversations to go, right? I've seen, they have very simple things. They have very clean no-goes, right? Most salespeople, they'll wake up in the morning. I was just joking about this earlier, right? They'll shave and they'll always be well-groomed, right?
Correct.
Which is why you can always see a salesperson on a sabbatical when they stop shaving and growing their hair.
That means he's not doing sales.
They have this deep need to, just let themselves go a little bit. But discipline, clear principles, always put them first. Those simple things which make for an empathetic conversation. You can do a lot. There's a lot of ways of selling, but that one is always guaranteed to succeed.
How are venture investors looking at the software market for India?
They were ahead of their time, right? People have been funding, VCs have been funding SaaS software for over 15 years now, right? And some great companies have been created, right? There's some amazing people at erstwhile Sequoia, now Peak 15 at Excel, right? People like Shekhar Kirani, Prashant, Prakash, they come to mind, right? Some of the great SaaS companies have been, again, out of India, we've created a lot of amazing SaaS companies that are now listed in the US, right? Where I think we have justifiably good reason to be proud of the Zohos, right? Which is not a VC funded company, but Freshworks, right? And Dhruva, and so many stories that come to mind. So VCs are ahead of their time.
One of the interesting parts there when you mentioned Freshworks, and I was thinking of SaaS Boomi, is that it seems like Indian SaaS founders tend to stick together. Like there seems to be a sort of thing about helping each other out, etc. Where is that coming from?
in India, you have to stick together. If you're not a big enough group, you'll get eaten apart, right? We all are aware of the notices that will show up, and every industry is always under siege,
Sure.
in one way or the other. But I think SaaS Boomi also, because the VC funded ecosystem, right? Because a lot of these people have capital first, and then they have to find this thing, right? They're basically built on promise. They're built on that we're going to find a high growth opportunity and so on and so forth. You tend to learn early not to play zero sum games.
Got it.
Very few people can succeed in an isolated manner. Talent is scarce and opportunity is scarce, and how to navigate. All great companies will always do something for the first time.
Yeah.
Right. And in the VC funded ecosystem, especially in SaaS in India, right? There are so many things you do for the first time, right? I'll tell you a fun challenge, right? In India, it's very difficult for a SaaS company to exhaust their marketing budget efficiently.
Okay.
Like, for example, how do you spend, say I give you $1 million to acquire customers, right? You know how hard it is to spend $1 million in just marketing for SaaS in India, because you don't know what is the best way to spend your marketing dollars. What do I do? What do I create? Do I create a mixer? Or there are a lot of mixers, they're too generic, right? How do you create something that breaks the clutter and so on and so forth, right? It's so
hard.
What happens is, now if you have a community, people will share and people are very happy to exchange, because I think playing zero sum games is very difficult. You won't succeed by playing zero sum games, because everybody is under siege, right? Nobody is trying to take somebody else's pie, right? My greatest inspiration is so Anand Jain, who's co-founder at Clevertap, and there's Avlesh. Avlesh runs WebEngage.
Yes.
Both of them are at Burp together.
Yes.
Right. And both are effectively essentially in the same market, right? Different places, and both have strategy, both have survived and thrived, right? And created big and what I believe to be companies that are going to last a long time, are going to be great examples. But there's a lot of mutual, like you sit together and they'll happily talk to each other and so on and so forth. Right? They'll not
hold things to themselves. They'll not share insights.
Yeah, they're opponents, not enemies. Right? And you see a lot of that. Of course, if you mention SaaS Boomi, I have to mention, Avinash, right? Avinash Raghava is the chief convener.
Of course.
SaaS Boomi is a not-for-profit. Right? SaaS Boomi is also a great community. They put a lot of people together saying, guys, talk to each other. Right? I would say this doesn't come naturally. Right? Especially
which is why it stands out to us. Like,
it stands out. People stand together. They talk to us. You'll be surprised how many people make time for each other. Right. And there's such a stark difference, by the way. It's not just that. The people like Vinny, used to be the founder of, and got a company, CloudCherry, got acquired by Cisco. Right. He's now at Unifor. Right. If you're visiting in the Valley, if you're visiting the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, whatever, right? Vinny opens up his home, right? He said, come by, sit down, talk for an hour. What can I do? How can I help? Who can I connect you with? Because again, I think there's almost a post-scarcity thinking. That, there's going to be money, there's opportunity for everybody. You're not, it's not necessary for you to lose for me to win. Again, new domain. So it's positive. I know that I can call people up and I'll get assistance, I'll get connected. And that's honestly comforting.
I think that's true for any business where the market pie is growing. For example, in wealth management also, most of it seems like zero-sum game, but it shouldn't be. Because the market is too large for any of us singly to serve it. Kuldeep, you've gone from being a founder to being a professional and going back to being a founder and back and forth, etc. What was going on? Like, why was that journey like that, right?
I think I went to engineering college in 97, right? And Bill Gates represented big evil Microsoft. Jerry Yang was building Yahoo, and he was cool. So, and I was doing mechanical engineering mostly because my father was a mechanical engineer. So there is this affinity, right? The biggest thing in tech was Y2K, 3 years away, right? The world was going to end.
We are that old.
Right? Get old, that young, depending on depending on if you're getting therapy or not. But the biggest place you could find a job was, Infosys, Wipro and everything. And honestly, they were just not interesting, because all of us, or most of us, wanted to be like Jerry Yang and, so on and so forth. America was a long way away, right? Again, remember, I don't know how to emphasize what the 90s and the early thousands were like, right? I did bit. I mean, I didn't even know the word founder. I think first discovered the word founder in 2011, 12, right? I mean, before then we used to be like, okay, I'm running this business. There was really no funding to speak of, right? There was really no. I mean, you had to be really credentialed to be able to raise money. But I did what I did because, I just felt like there was no market for the skills that I had, right? I used to be able to write code. I'm always good at that. Early on realized that I don't have what it takes to be a very, very good engineer. You need to be patient, and you need to be focused on a craft, and I just couldn't focus on a craft, right? My handwriting's terrible because I didn't have the patience to do the Sulek exercises, right? So I just didn't have that. So I did a business, did a few, right? Stumbled from here and there. Why I went back to being professional is, one is I got lucky. I had degree of privilege. I was doing this consulting project for Nokia, and I happened to meet Sandeep, and Sandeep is now a CMO at Cvent. It's a big company in Gurgaon, right? And Sandeep just happened to say that we love what you're doing for us. We're looking for a product manager, because Nokia at that point of time was building a SaaS product, which was for these roots beat salespeople ability to enter an order on a very cheap Nokia phone. Right, because it was a massive market, right? Nokia was like 70-80% of the market.
3310.
Right, yeah. So Nokia was like 70-80% of the market back then, and I had already spent 5-6 years. My wife used to work at Shell, right? And I was basically not bringing any money home. Everything was just being pulled up. I was run a call center, did a bit of this, a bit of that, doing some consulting on the side, right? But never had enough money. And then, I got married in 2015. It was 2005. Sorry, it's such a long.
We'll have to edit that out.
Yeah. 2005. Right? And we had a kid on the way in 2009. And at that moment, suddenly, you just kind of grow up.
Yeah.
Like, dude, I need some money. Right? Sure. So mostly that, and then Sandeep just happened to offer, and it was no brainer. I just shifted very, very quickly, and it was so weird, like, to be 30. I was 30 when I made my first salary. So,
and were you able to slip into a job that way? Like, was it easy?
So weirdly, it helped that I never had to worry about. I didn't understand corporate hierarchies, or that you need to keep your mouth shut, which worked amazing because Nokia encouraged you to stand up and stood up for myself. I was lucky enough that people around me didn't throw me to the dogs. They said, he may have a point. So my ability, when you're an entrepreneur, really, if you don't open your mouth and say, you're never going to get anything, right? If you need something, you got to speak and ask for it. That helped me. So I joined as a product manager at age 30, right? And by 2030, Nokia was in hard times, right? I had very little to do with it, I promise. but then our project got shelved, which was I was building a product called Nokia Tej. And once that got shelved, I just wrote to a bunch of people and saying, what, I have 6 months of severance. I'm sitting here. If you want some, if you want a free resource, I'm available. And then, the Nokia developer experience team was looking for somebody, who would go and talk to developers. Like, I'll happily do that because it doesn't cost you much. And, that was how I actually became an evangelist for mobile operating systems, talking to developers and large companies. And then Windows Phone came around that time, right? 12, 13. And I started championing Windows Phone to companies. And, again, because it was fun. To have a new operating system, to enjoy the nuance of it. I keep telling people I fought in the trenches of the OS wars. A lot of people think that that iOS was a done deal and Android, but in 2012, 13, it didn't seem like it, right? And around 13, 14, Nokia had a massive hold on the market, right? The Windows Phone actually had decent share. It looked like we might win. Didn't end up that way because the world was very different. But in India, at least, all the top brands had their apps on the Windows Phone. Me and, working under some very good leaders, we had the ability, we were able to make an impact. But by 2015, I was also getting tired because these were very large companies. And another thing I did was 2009, because, for the first time I had regular income, I was able to buy a house. And by 2014, I had paid off, the home loan, right? And thank God for that. No penalty for prepaying a home loan, right? Because I just had one goal. Whatever money I get, every 3 months, I'm just going to write a check, right? And by 2014, I owned my house. And then you realize the benefits of working in India. Once you own your own house, right? You're strong, you're powerful, right? And I still live in the same house. I don't have a desire to buy another bigger or whatever house, right? Our house is big enough and we have 2 kids. And it was great. So in 2015, when Anand said that, what are you doing at Microsoft? Nokia got acquired by Microsoft, Nokia India. And then, I was just about to transfer to Microsoft, and Anand said, what are you doing at that big company? Why aren't you, I'm building, and Clevertap was called VizRocket. So I actually switched on at 2-3 day notice. I was making the transition. I was able to come out very quickly. And I still remember there was no JD and so on and so forth. But the desire to go back where so one thing I've held very dearly in my life is that the more ambiguity you're able to absorb at a job, the more valuable you are at that company.
Absolutely.
Because, if I am saying, so my first job at Clevertap, by the way, was to do support. Because when I showed up, Anand didn't really have a role for me. And I didn't have a joining letter or anything, right? I just trusted Anand because we trekked together. And Anand said, will you do support? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do support, right? I didn't know it then, but I was willingly accepting low status and absorb and making something which was very ambiguous, no longer Anand's problem. Right? Anand had other things to deal with, right? Like raising money and, figuring out what PMF and so on and so forth. But then from support to running customer success, to then finally stepping up and saying, I can do some sales as well, because I've been talking to some of these people we sell to, right? And then learning sales from first principle. But I never remember people telling me my job. I was able to say, you know what, I will go and deliver this revenue. This is no longer a problem you have to worry about. And if you absorb that ambiguity, right, you'll be surprised what people will give you. They'll give you resources, they'll give you promotion, they'll give you status.
So you were excited about Clevertap or the VizRocket story, and then that...
I was excited about the people who were building it.
Yeah, sure.
And they were doing some cool stuff, right? I don't want to get too technical, but they essentially were writing a database. And they were figuring out that we use this database to power, or become a single source of truth for customer interactions with apps, right? And that allowed them to do amazing things early on at scale, right? So when the growth curve for Indian apps hit, right, Clevertap was positioned very well, right? And they've done very, very well, right? It's a resilient and a strong company that has significant business in India and outside, but it started from India. So, I rode that wave. Yeah, well, ESOPs are tricky, right? Because I think the outcome that most people have seen from ESOPs are, these secondaries that companies do,
Sure.
right? Which I think are somewhat suboptimal, because that just necessitates that there is excess capital available, right? The founders. So I have an overall thing of how to negotiate. I tell people that, at least for most jobs, and it can differ for most people, but I think the best time for negotiating your compensation is not the first time you're doing it as a job. It's the first time a review comes up, right? Because by then you've created an impact, right? If you really, really like a company and if you're aligned with what that company is doing, you want a job, right? Okay. So I did not negotiate my salary with Anand, right? And at every review, right, Anand just kept giving me a raise, right? In the end, of course, I made commission, and I tend to feel I made more than I actually deserved at some point in time, because I think there was some amount of fear they're saying that, let's just give it to him. It doesn't matter. He creates the impact, right? But the right time to negotiate actually is once you've created the impact rather than before it, right? Because the difference there is, if I'm not asking you to make an investment, right? Or am I asking you to speculate on my abilities? Which could be true, but that depends on how much reputation I have. So how hard you negotiate is how much reputation you really carry in the industry, right? I have done this before and so on and so forth. I absolutely deserve this. But I've always said that, as long as it's a respectable offer and it takes care of that, right? Which is where then ESOPs come in, right? The cash component in a company that's growing fast in an opportunity, if I really believe in that, right? You really want to maximize, how you get paid in terms of ESOPs, right? Now, I do believe that ESOPs get a bad reputation, some of it deserved, because of how people have manipulated some of that, right? For example, any company that tells you you have to exercise your ESOPs within 6 months of leaving didn't want to give you ESOPs in the first place, right? They don't, because, and you probably appreciate this far more because, people also don't know how to value options. Right? What is the value of this option and how to value this? So I think it's a complex product for most first timers, where I believe most companies should offer that, hey, we can either give you an ESOP or we can give you a long-term incentive plan. That at the end of every year or the end of every 4 years, right, we'll just give you this big cash bonus. Again, I'm not an expert on compensation, but I do believe that at least for new joinees, they should almost always be offered an alternative, because most people tend not to value ESOPs, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. And actually, you feel like it's almost like a part of the company. But if the other party doesn't get it, then maybe there needs to be an alternative that they get. Right? When today it's like binary ki ya to aap ESOP lo ya to we don't have anything.
Correct. But also ESOPs are an amazing way to build wealth, right? When I joined Clevertap, right, it was a company which was very young, right, seed stage, right, with a valuation that will probably go with that thing, right. When I left Clevertap, right, within a year they raised money again, right, at some $700 odd million value, right. So if you look at from that range, right, that's a 60, 70, 80. I mean, I don't know the exact multiple, right, but nowhere else will you see that kind of a multiplication over 5-6 years. Right. And sure, you could argue it's a book valuation, the stock is not exactly liquid, it's not like I can sell it somewhere. Sure, I mean, that'll happen, right? But you look at any journey, right, to build a good company, you're going to take that 7 to 10 years kind of a journey, right? It's been 10 years since Clevertap was founded. So ESOPs, when you've been a part of a great growth journey, when the company goes through a journey, can be they can actually change
the course of your life also.
The course of your life, right? Massively, right? Yeah. I mean, but again, there's so many other things have to happen. Sure. I like to think of it as that companies that offer ESOPs, you have to think of ESOPs as a fantastic lottery ticket with a high probability of success, right? Negotiate a cash compensation, but if you really think that the company is going to be transformative, right? Make sure that you get a fairly big lottery ticket, right? And I encourage people that you should absolutely have an ESOP plan, but you should also figure out, you should always offer an alternative. Okay, you don't want ESOP, we can give you slightly more comp, right? Or by the way, I can trade some of my annual compensation for some amount of stocks, right? It's you should have some flexibility.
No, I think, when you talk about it, it seems like you can help put better value to your ESOP if there's an alternative. Right?
Yes.
Because then you can quantify.
Because they can't value options, but you can, right?
Sure.
I mean, if you're trading in futures or option, which I don't recommend anybody without that being their day job do. But you know that what an option's worth because there is a science behind it, right? Yeah. But a person who's just looking for a job, who's just going to be, for example, run revenue operations for you, right? That person probably doesn't really know how to value that option well because also the complete information is not really available, and most people don't know enough to ask, right? What is the total number of outstanding? When is the next round expected? Are you describing how many options you're giving me, or what is the value of options? Sure. What is the fair market? Sure. It's just a bit complex. But if you say that you can take so many options, or maybe you can take this much more cash, this is a choice.
It helps put a value to
that. Helps put a value, and then also, by the way, distinguishes very clearly that what are you really valuing. For what it's worth. If you believe in the company, you should always take the ESOPs over cash.
What is this whole wealth and money meant to you? Has it influenced your own startup? When you started up, was it a function of how much wealth you built?
You need to know what is the bare minimum you need. Rent is a big component. You want to live well. You want to live in a safe place. I had the house that I wanted. Right, I had already paid it off. I made a reasonable good amount of money. So I actually looked at that. Okay, if I make zero cash, how long will I be able to get along, right? Now I have kids, right? And at some point in time, they're going to go to college, and you have these big spends that are pretty much factored in. But in terms of saying, okay, to me, when you do a startup or when you decide that, what you're really trading off is that, okay, there may not be a lot of cash. Right? Because it feels unfair to pay yourself a very big salary when somebody is saying that we're going to invest that money in you, right? I have this personal belief that once you break even on cash flow basis, right? Then is when you can pay yourself a market salary, right? It's very unfair because if somebody's come in and they've taken money, and sure, you can argue it anyways. There's no point getting into the argument. For me, it was very fair that at last 9, I was not going to be able to make a lot of cash, right? And I need to be able to tune that up and down. Because, if I'm going to go through a hard time, I want to be the first person to take a salary cut, or say, guys, we're going to go through a bunch of lean months. So you need to be able to tune it up and down, right? I'm sure you've early days you must have done something similar. Everybody has similar stories, right? But you need a certain amount of reserves, right? And I look back post Clevertap, I had realized that I still have a lot of risk appetite, right? I actually wrote a lot of angel checks, and I'm surprised how well some of those companies have done. Again, it's all paper profits, right? I'm probably not seeing half of that money again, But I had a decent risk appetite, and what is the best way to vet your risk appetite is I'm gonna go build a company,
Yeah.
and that's always a long term focused endeavor.
Hmm.
But I think it worked out pretty
And
well.
outside of angel, how are you investing?
I don't like FDs because it's like watching paint dry. So I have a what do you call those, portfolio management services,
Sure.
right? I put some money there,
Mhm.
right? More as a benchmark that what would be the difference between a professional manager and me. So I do dabble a little bit. Nowadays, investing has become easier, if not
Yeah.
nothing else, right? I mean, you don't have to deal with a lot of that overhead
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. I buy a lot of ETFs,
Mhm.
mostly because, why not? It just
Yeah,
makes
yeah.
more sense.
Yeah.
I have some mutual funds that I bought long ago, which, I mean, if you bought any mutual fund in the early thousands,
Yeah.
then they're all,
They'll be
crazy.
multi-baggers by themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you just leave them. I tend to just keep investing. Obviously, there is, I maximize my PF contributions. And because that seems like just a fantastic way to
Tax
have a
efficient.
big, nest egg.
Yeah.
So yeah, nothing exciting as such. What stock market dabbling I do mostly because I use Dhan as a trading platform. I do it more for entertainment than actually meaningful returns.
Hmm.
I've also realized that people who manage your money professionally will always beat you
Hmm.
in this market.
Hmm.
I've actually gone public saying that 7-8% difference on XIRR even in this high growth market, right?
Yeah.
Like what I did myself, right? So I had some money in the market which I didn't want to because I had to pay taxes on all the gains,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But then I had some money which was already with me. I
Yeah.
was during COVID I was almost completely in cash because I was making up my mind what I want to do next.
Hmm.
So I put some money in a PMS and I tried
Comparing.
slowly entering the market, ek ek karke, and I realized, oh my God, it's such a big difference when somebody manages your money professionally.
Yeah.
My recommendation to people usually is, pick somebody you trust and tell them, like, will you manage my money
Yeah.
professionally? It's not possible because the entry level is a little bit high. But when possible, let professionals deal with your money and not touch it yourself, especially if money is not your day job.
Yeah. And with a life as exciting as yours, I suspect one part of your life can be watching paint dry. Like,
well, as long as okay, sure. I mean, my point is that if you make your own FDs and everything, right? It's a little
no, I'm saying in
yeah.
general, like the fact that you let somebody else do it, but
allocation decisions
Yeah.
should all they should be, you can hire professionals who are kept honest by I mean, they're very well regulated. I honestly believe that, for example, that's the job you guys do, right? I'd much rather trust you with making those allocation decisions than me, because I tend to be riskier and riskier, right? I mean,
Yeah.
let's be honest, right? Most of my personal wealth is locked away in unlisted equity.
Unlisted,
And I said, I'm not
illiquid
seeing
equity,
half
yeah.
of that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's illiquid. Sure, right? If the market turns and I remain hopeful, there are I bought a lot of lottery tickets that can have very big returns at some point in time. But the electricity bill comes every month,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
Right, and all the bills come every month, so you
Yeah.
need somebody to make sure that part of it is safe.
Yeah.
For me, I can take risks because a big part of my money is managed, and people who are incentivized to make their money grow so that they can take a certain cut of it.
Sure.
I like that model, and I like the fact that it is so transparent now, right? I can monitor my money on a daily basis, right? No one's doing any funny stuff with the money. I think we've come a long way.
Yeah, I think from an Indian regulation perspective, and we were doing a study how India is regulated versus elsewhere, and you can see a massive difference in the incentives here in
Right? I
India.
mean, some of these account aggregator frameworks and everything, right? Now I
Yeah.
have so many apps where I can look at where my portfolio is, and between the CDSL and NS, I don't even understand most of this, but I can watch my portfolio grow day by day. And not that I recommend you watch your portfolio day by day. You tend to want to fiddle with it,
Sure.
right? Give it to somebody professional and trust them.
Yeah.
But the point is that they're also being watched
Sure.
very carefully. And I have to say that some of these recent judgments about what they've done with some of these influencers, and some of these people are forced to pay back the gains they made
Yes.
by bad advice.
Yes.
Though that inspires confidence, right?
Yes.
It feels good to have a regulator watching out for this thing, right? To keep everybody honest, and that's great. Which means that I feel safe that okay, professionals, here's my money, manage it so that I can actually go do the risky stuff with my life, right?
Kuldeep, I said you're the first SaaS founder on the podcast, and now we know why. It's been exciting talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. It was lovely speaking with you, man.